Hello, my name is Dr. Christine Bishara, and today I'm doing part 2 of a series of interviews that I'm doing with H.G. Tudor, who's a diagnosed narcissistic psychopath, and I'm looking forward to interviewing him again today. If you haven't already seen it, please take a look at part 1 of our video on narcissism. We discuss a lot of really interesting topics related to narcissistic personality disorder. Thank you, HG, for joining me. Maybe you can introduce yourself.
Thank you, Christine. Thank you for inviting me back. Pleasure to be here. Yes, as Christine has mentioned, my name is H.G. Tudor, which is a pseudonym that I operate under. I protect my identity to ensure that I can remain effective in what I do in my private and professional lives. I'm a diagnosed narcissistic psychopath, and I write and talk extensively about what it is to be a narcissistic psychopath and how my kind operate and function, and letting you know more about the world in which we operate and our various perspectives on the world, so that you gain a better understanding in order to help yourself, should you be involved with us, and also to satisfy the curiosity that you may have about our kind and scratch those particular itches.
Sounds good, HG. And I want to also mention that you've divided narcissists into 4 specific types, the lessers, the mid, and the graders, which is different from the DSM. And we discussed that in our first interview.
Yes.
Just to kind of summarize, you identify the graders as aware narcissists, which is a rare kind of narcissist. And
that's
then,
correct.
Right, the lessers and the mid-rangers, they're the more common. Lessers are more obvious, so they're bold and brash and belligerent, like you say, so their behavior is very obvious to someone. I do want to focus on the mid-rangers today because not only are they the most common type of narcissist, according to what you mentioned, but they're the hardest to spot. And I want you to talk a little bit about why that is, that they're the hardest to spot, but also for people who aren't aware that they're dealing with a mid-range narcissist, what are their things to look for? Are there specific things that they do differently from the other types of narcissists? So I'd love to hear your feedback on that.
Certainly. One mustn't lose sight of the fact that my kind are predators. Why are we predators? Well, we regard people as what they can do for us, whether that's consciously or unconsciously. We see, either consciously or unconsciously, people as prey. They're there to provide us with the prime aims, there to be controlled, to provide us with our lifeblood, which is fuel, to provide us with character traits, which we utilize for ourselves to enable us to fit in and to gain control over other people, and the residual benefits, which covers a whole host of things, ranging from provision of great sex, a roof over our head, somebody to give us our medication, someone to provide money to us, somebody that might look after us when we're unwell, give us access to networks, and a whole host of things besides. And everything that a narcissist does is geared around the prime aims. So the narcissist isn't interested in you because you're intelligent. The narcissist isn't interested in you because you've got gorgeous bee-stung lips. The narcissist isn't interested in you because you just happen to be brilliant at cooking. Yes, those are things that the narcissist can make use of, but we're not inherently interested in you because of who you are. We're interested in what you can provide to us. And so we're predators that feed off you by pulling the prime aims from you, by controlling you, drawing fuel, getting those character traits and residual benefits. And the most successful predators are the ones that are able to lay their hands on their prey the most often with the easiest of capture, the easiest method of ensnarement, and are able to have a range of prey that they can feast upon. So we briefly mentioned the lessers. And because they're more obvious in their behaviors, they tend to be a little more red of tooth and claw. They tend to be bolder. They tend to be brash. They tend to boast. They tend to be particularly haphazard. So after a period of time, people start to steer clear of them. Now, for them, they can then move from one watering hole to another. So that if they find in a particular town, everybody thinks, well, he's a bit of an arsehole, he's a womanizer, he's always getting in bar fights, he can't hold down a job. And basically the populace generally knows that's about him, he's forced to move elsewhere. So that predator is driven away from that watering hole and has to go and find a new one. But often they do, because there's plenty of watering holes in the world. And he moves on to the next town. The mid-range narcissist has the advantage of being able to hang around at the watering hole looking like all of the other animals that are there, and doesn't stand out as an immediate predator, and therefore has evolved in that way to become more effective by blending in and appearing like the victim, appearing to care through cognitive empathy, appearing to behave in a manner which is kind and helpful, so that they operate the facade of helpfulness, or they operate a facade of being a cheerful, happy-go-lucky soul that people are attracted to, or a facade of superiority, whereby he's a cocky so-and-so, but he is very good at what he does, and you just can't help but like it, because he has that inherent charisma and ability. So the predators that we are, we want to get close to our prey. And if we come running and screaming with neon lights and klaxons to the watering hole, our prey scatter and run away and make life more difficult for us. And our narcissism has evolved to want the maximum buck for the minimum spend. And so the maximum bang for the buck, rather. And so it operates in an efficient way. And the way that the mid-rangers have evolved is they are much more likely to fit in, and that they obtain their prey by being much more like their prey, by appearing empathic, by appearing kind, appearing compassionate, mirroring those particular traits. So mid-rangers are more proliferate. There's a greater proliferation of them as a consequence of the fact that they've become more successful at blending in with their prey, meaning they've got greater access to that prey. And therefore, they are harder to spot. Now, greaters are also very hard to spot, but what tends to allow a greater to be spotted is their sheer occupation in the stratosphere. That the elevation to which they've climbed, you think, well, in order to get to that position, you're going to have to be pretty self-obsessed and trampling on people beneath you. So they kind of stand out in that way, albeit hugely charismatic and likable. But often people don't tend to have that much to do with the greaters, because they do occupy that rarefied stratosphere. And it's the mid-rangers that more people have involvement with, and there are a greater number of them. And it's because they move amongst you far more readily.
Very interesting. And it kind of makes me think of the survival of the fittest type phenomenon, where the mid-range kind of learned, right, to be able to fit in a little bit better. And I know you call them fake empaths because they are like chameleons. So, it kind of reminds me of what you had mentioned in our first interview, which is that the fake empaths, or at least when you have a narcissistic predisposition, whether it's genetic and coupled with a lack of control environment, you're either going to become a narcissist or a normal or an empath. And it kind of makes me think, I wonder what it is. Is there some kind of trigger that makes one person who grew up in that environment with that genetic predisposition turn into a narcissist versus an empath? And there might not be an answer to that. I'm just curious if you've kind of come across anything that might, suggest one or the other.
As you know, the creation of a narcissist comes from that genetic predisposition allied with a lack of control environment. And there are particular factors that are more likely to create a mid-range narcissist than there would be in relation to a lesser. And they are largely environmental factors. I'm not going to say any more about that at this juncture, because I'm working on a series about the various, how both the empath and the narcissist, the environment and genetic predisposition, what it is that perhaps causes the different flavor of empath or narcissist to arise. But what I will say is that when it comes to the creation of the mid-ranger, part of the reason that they become mid-range is linked to the environment in which they find themselves. Ditto with the lesser. So you will always find outliers, but in general terms with the lesser, you're looking at a more out and out abusive environment, so that they don't acquire the polish that is seen with the mid-ranger. And it's all about, they might find themselves in an environment where it's bullying, where it's, you're going to be you're told at the age 11, you're a man now, and they've been told before all of that, you've got to fend for yourself. You get your retaliation in first. And it's those rather obvious behaviors, that domineering environment that's not supportive, positively caustic, bullying and unpleasant, that leads more to the creation of a lesser. With a mid-ranger, you're more likely to get that environment of where the environment is one of supposed support, but not a grade B environment, for instance, being told you should have scored 3 goals rather than the 2 that you did. Why didn't you come first in your examination rather than 5th, and so forth? And of course, part of where the narcissism creates, it will mirror what it sees. So where you have that bullying, brash individual, you're more likely to have a narcissist that's created from a bullying, brash environment that becomes a similar narcissist. Not always, but more likely. And similarly with a mid-range narcissist, the mid-range narcissist that is emotionally distant from them, but maintains a facade to the outside world of being kind and decent, the child narcissist in effect mirrors and replicates that environment for themselves and follows the precision of a facade when they become a narcissist when they're older. So there is a significant environmental factor that's applicable, and that both goes with the creation of empaths and narcissists, and I have a series that's going into that in greater detail.
That makes sense what you say, and I'm looking forward to seeing that series, and I think it'll be very enlightening. Mm-hmm. Thank you. You mentioned that the graders are aware, and yes. Curiosity is this. What if a lesser or a mid-range becomes aware, is told by someone just based on their behavior that, I think you're a narcissist. Do they then automatically become a grader or not? Curious.
They don't. The fact is, the lesser or mid-range narcissist sits there mired in their own blindness as to what they are, cruising through life completely oblivious. So the lesser basically is that wrecking ball, whether they're lower lesser, middle lesser, upper lesser A, upper lesser B. They just do what they want without due regard. And hey, you don't like it, there's the door. This is just the way that I am. And they don't see any problem with that. With your mid-rangers, they, of course, believe that they're decent people. And how on earth could they be a narcissist? I care. I care about you. I do all of these things. I'm involved in charities. I coach the children in football, point to all of these behaviors to support the fact that they're not a narcissist. So the lesser just thinks, hey, you've got to get through life the best you can. That's it. They don't think any more beyond that. And the mid-ranger, they invariably think that they're decent people. So neither of those groups know that they're a narcissist. But if you come along and sit them down and say, well, hello, Mr. Middle Lesser, you realize that you're a narcissist, he's more likely to perhaps scratch his genitals and look rather puzzled and go, what be one of them then? And not actually comprehend what on earth you're talking about. Or quite simply, don't you be coming at me with these big dictionary words and swear at you, get out of here, because his narcissism will automatically reject it, because the suggestion that he's a narcissist is a threat to his control, and his narcissism will reject it. It won't cause him to go, maybe that's right. I maybe am a narcissist. That just won't happen. With the mid-ranger, what tends to happen is they will either reject the suggestion by saying, there's nothing wrong with me, you're the narcissist, and blame the victim and say that they are. And oh, here you are coming along with your psychology degree again, diagnosing me, saying that I'm the narcissist. Well, actually, I've done a bit of reading, Mrs. Cleverpants, and I've worked out that you're the narcissist. So don't you come, because what you're doing is you're projecting, you see, and they immediately engage in their own projection, accusing you of projection. So their innate self-defense mechanism comes to their rescue once again and rejects the suggestion. Now, what you do get is with certain mid-rangers, and the ones that I call the mid-ranger that would be king, that believe that they are an aware narcissist, but they're actually not. And these fall into 2 distinct groups. The first of the ones, and I occasionally get them contacting me, almost sidling up to me in a conspiratorial manner, saying, HG, I'm just like you. And I think to myself, no, you're not. And they say, I am this uber Machiavellian character. And if I question them about their supposed Machiavellian dealings, I'm met with vagueness and deflection, because they can't detail anything, because they're not. Yes, they're manipulative in the way that an unaware mid-range narcissist is manipulative, but they think that they're aware and they're not. So they think they are a greater, but they're not, which means they still remain an unaware narcissist because they don't know what type they are. The second group, and these are probably the most dangerous for genuine victims, are those narcissists who are unaware, but think that they're unaware, think that they are aware, I beg your pardon, and that they're healing or that they've healed. And that they come along and they say, I know that I'm a narcissist and I've worked on myself and I've conquered my narcissism. I've owned it and I'm a better person. No, that is just the narcissism talking through them, claiming to make them a better person in order to assert control over that victim, to draw them in by thinking, oh, look, he's done the work on himself and he's become cured. The narcissism won't let that happen. The narcissism, in effect, is almost conning the host by making the host think that he is cured, so that he can say to people, I'm either, yes, I'm a narcissist, but I'm working through the issues and I'm making the changes and I want to be a better person. That's just the narcissism speaking. It's not genuine, and it's just another manipulation. And those individuals, and you find some of them popping up on YouTube, are particularly dangerous because they send out a message to people to suggest that an unaware narcissist can suddenly become aware and that they can somehow, in effect, become better and cure themselves. They don't. All they're doing is continuing to manipulate you, continuing to con the victims, and they're doing so by creating this appearance and image that they've somehow done the work and improved themselves. So they cannot become aware. And where there are instances that you think that they might be aware, they're not, for the reasons that I've just explained.
So you're saying it's more of a manipulative tactic to try to convince.
It's an unaware manipulative tactic because they don't realize it's a tactic. I, for instance, because I'm aware, what I could do is I could say, great news, Tudorites. I am cured of my narcissism. I've been seeing the good doctors for umpteen years, and they've now declared to me that I have got my narcissism under control, that I don't need to devalue anybody, and I've been with this lady now for a number of years, and there's never been any problems. I know that I'm lying because I'm an aware narcissist, and I potentially could do that for the purpose of manipulating my audience to say all of those things, okay? But I'm not going to, because I have no interest in doing that. You get the unaware mid-range narcissists who believe that they've changed, who believe that they're cured, that they believe that they've been working on themselves, but it's just their narcissism talking through them, causing them to say all of that in order to do what? Assert control of their audience by thinking that they've improved and they've become better, drawing fuel from everybody's response. Well done. That's great that you've achieved that. I'm so pleased that you've done so. It gives me hope for the situation with my husband, with my wife. It allows the acquisition of character traits, and of course, there's the residual benefits that come with it. It's just the continued manipulation of an unaware narcissist.
So are you saying that there isn't a cure for any narcissist, even with long-term therapy? Because I have heard that long-term, many years of therapy, that they're not cured, but they're able to kind of at least recognize certain behaviors and, you know, switch them or at least work on them. You're saying no, like it's all manipulation.
Even that remains a manipulation because the narcissism is inherent. The narcissism doesn't go away. Yeah. All that happens is the nature of the manipulation alters. So it moves from. I remember. Yeah. Whenever a narcissist has an interaction, it's about the prime aims. It's not about out of the goodness of our heart, or it's not founded on emotional empathy. You can't inject emotional empathy into somebody who hasn't got it. So as you know, when I'm talking to you, Christine, and I'm being polite, professional, and courteous, I'm not doing it because I'm inherently polite, professional, and courteous. I'm doing it because I recognize as a narcissist that's the most effective way for me to control you, draw fuel from you, etc. So that's why I behave in that way. I recognize it. Now, you don't suffer a downside because you don't feel manipulated, you don't feel controlled. You're thinking, well, we're having a conversation, of course, this interview, that's all good, it's all interesting, and it's a win-win, fair enough. However, where the narcissist might shift their, if I could call it their skill set, whereby previously they engaged in behaviors which were more vitriolic, but they then move to an alternative outcome. They're still manipulating, but they're doing it in a different way. Now, some people will say, well, that's a gain. rather than him slap me, he actually just sits down and has a circular conversation with me. He's still being manipulated. Or rather than him shout and scream at me, now, when he recognizes he's on the cusp of doing that, he goes off and goes and does something else. Well, he's still asserting control over you by withdrawal.
Right.
Because his narcissism needs to get that. So he's still getting what he needs. It's just that the behavior has shifted. So what you might be able to do is modify the narcissist's behaviors, but you're never going to get rid of the narcissism because it's entrenched and pathological. Now, that's not to say that at the year 3510, there might be some discovery whereby some specific laser beam might be used on a part of the brain that alters it, and all of a sudden those entrenched pathological behaviors are wiped out, and you then are able to create some form of empathy, because we don't know what will happen in the future. But that's certainly not around the corner. Okay. And remember, narcissism is a self-defense mechanism. So if you're trying to intrinsically and inherently change the narcissist's behavior, what are you doing? You're threatening the narcissist's sense of control. So the narcissism is going to fight against it. It's a little bit like if you have got purple spot disease and a doctor comes towards you with a syringe, which will cure it, the nature of your purple spot disease makes you run away out of the doctor's surgery because it recognizes that's a threat. So it causes you, the host, to depart. So you can't be cured of it. The narcissism operates in the same way. There is no cure. And even if there were, the narcissism's not going to let the narcissist be exposed to it unless the narcissism sees that there's going to be a benefit in doing so. So why did I engage with the good doctors? Because my narcissism dictated that it would enable me to control them, draw fuel from them, and moreover, gain the residual benefit of making me more dangerous than I already am by learning more about me. That's why I went there. I didn't go there to get better in terms of be cured. I went there to become more effective, and I wanted to learn more about myself because I'm a fascinating individual.
You definitely are, HG. It's a little bit scary hearing you say that. Well, and so you mentioned empathy, and
yes.
We know narcissists do not have empathy. I mean, narcissistic individuals have a little bit, but I'm curious because there's emotional empathy and there's cognitive empathy. And, you know, I think like, especially with the mid-rangers or the graders, there's that cognitive empathy where you can actually understand over time by learning how people behave when they're empathic, versus emotional empathy. Can you talk a little bit about the two and kind of differentiate them and you know, just kind of give a little bit of clarity on the two?
Certainly. So emotional empathy is, as you've just indicated, is something that's found in empathic people, normal people, and even narcissistic, but not narcissists. And that means that you have a range of empathic traits, being a love devotee, compassion, moral compass, decency, honesty, caring, truth seeker, and others. And that emotional empathy regulates you in an unconscious fashion. You don't have to think about it. You just do. Now, occasionally you will think about your actions in terms of, that person might not like it if I behave that way, so perhaps I won't do it. Or, well, I found this wallet in the street and it's stuffed with money. If I lost my wallet, I would hope that somebody would return it, so I'm going to do the right thing. But a lot of the time, you're guided by it almost like an invisible force. So you don't routinely just walk into somebody's house without being invited. You don't take food off somebody's plate without them offering you a taste or asking, could I try those dirty fries that you've ordered? And you operate instinctively from a place of emotion in terms of ensuring that you function in a method of exhibiting that emotional empathy. So what happens is it's an instinctive response and one that you don't have to think about. Whereas compared with ourselves, the narcissist, we don't have any emotional empathy whatsoever. And instead, what happens is it's an intellectual response effectively that we have. Now, some narcissists don't even have cognitive empathy, and those are the rudimentary lessers. And mid-rangers, greater, and I, the ultra, we have this learned intellectual empathy, whereby the way that our narcissism works, it has allowed us to watch what other people do and essentially go, okay, so in that situation, that means this, and therefore the appropriate response is that. So let's say, for example, you're walking down the road and Mrs. Miggins from number 24 lies there collapsed in the road. You, without hesitation, will run over to check that she's okay. You won't think about it. You will just do it, governed by your empathic trait of caring and decency. And you'll go over to check that she's well. I come walking along the road, and there's Mrs. Miggins from number 24 lying prone in the road. I see that she's lying down there and that she's old. I therefore work out, albeit quickly, she may well have suffered some kind of injury or ill health episode. That means she may well be in distress. That means that she probably would need some help. Therefore, should I give her that help? And I evaluate whether that would be worth my time doing so. And so I would evaluate, what will I gain from helping Mrs. Miggins? Well, I'm walking with my girlfriend. So in order to maintain my facade, if I help Mrs. Miggins will be grateful and she will give me fuel. It'll also bolster my facade and my girlfriend will give me fuel as well. And I'm not in a particular rush, therefore I'll help Mrs. Miggins. On another occasion, I'm on my own and I need to be somewhere else which I deem to be important. So it's not worth my while assisting Mrs. Miggins, even though I've worked out that she needs assistance. So I step over her and carry on my way. So the difference is that ours, with cognitive empathy, it's a learned intellectual response that basically our narcissism evaluates. Show me this circumstance. So, for instance, when I was very young and I saw what I understood now to be crying, I didn't know what it was. And I asked my brother and sister, why is water leaking from their eyes? And they looked at me and laughed and said, that's crying, HG. And I said, why are they crying? They're hurt. So when you're hurt, you cry. Yes. So if I punch you in the face and that hurts you, that'll make you cry. Yes. And so I learned. And of course, all of these interactions, almost like a kind of supercomputer, the exposure that one has to it. And I've watched so many people, because I'm an observer as well, I watch the way that people behave in a certain scenario. So I know and understand that when you first meet somebody, you don't immediately grip them by their genitals. You shake hand, okay? That's the appropriate way to fit in. And that you make inquiry. How are you? I simply don't care how that person is. I have no interest in that. But I recognize that that's the appropriate response to fit in, and I can assert control over them by making an inquiry to their general health, and then they respond. So it's all learned behaviors. And it makes it look like I care, and it makes it look like I've got compassion, and it makes it look like that I love. But it's all learned. Now, I actually very quickly have that process going through my mind. In other instances, is instinctive. With an unaware narcissist, they've learned and it comes in instinctively. But their narcissism has effectively made that evaluation on their behalf and they're unconscious, because it doesn't come from a position of if you like, it's not an emotional response, it's a learned intellectual response. And that's the major distinction between the two.
So HG, you mentioned crying. So most people, non-narcissists, they see someone crying, it kind of emotionally affects them to a certain degree. What do you feel when you see someone crying? Does it, if there's someone close to you, do you feel like it's powerful for you that you made them cry?
Well, if somebody's crying and it's nothing to do with me, it irritates me because that's wasted fuel. And I then have to try and keep my contempt in check because it's demonstrative of their weakness. They're weak, crying over something. What does that serve? What does that serve? What purpose does it serve to cry about the fact that you missed the bus or that somebody's rejected you? It's pathetic. So if I see somebody that they're crying and it's not occasioned by me, it's irritating. However, if I recognize that there's a purpose to be served, then I might say to them, oh dear, what's the matter? And of course, within, I have this odious contempt for them, but I can maintain the facade of saying to them, or the veneer, oh, what's wrong? Oh, my boyfriend's just left me. Now, my immediate thought will be, good, that gives me a better opportunity to seduce you now he's out of the way. But at that instant, I determine that's not going to be the appropriate response here. And the better thing is to basically offer some tea and sympathy. And so that's what will occur, if I deem it appropriate. In other instances, I may well be quite dismissive and say, well, that's too bad. I'm sure if you ring your sister, she'll be delighted to hear all about it. You'll have to excuse me. I've got somewhere to go. Because obviously, if I don't think there's anything in it for me, I'm not going to hang around pretending to care. I'll only pretend to care if there's something for it. Now, if I make somebody cry, that's negative fuel, and it makes me feel powerful because I've occasioned that reaction in them. Indeed, that negative fuel is more powerful than positive fuel because it's harder to make somebody angry and upset compared to making them happy. It's easy to make people happy. It's easy to make people joyful. But to get them to react with irritation, with frustration, with upset, with anger, and it's particularly satisfying watching somebody cry as a consequence of what you've done, because it reinforces my superiority over them by demonstrating their weakness. They're resorting to blubbing. And I hear all these things about saying, well, it's cathartic to cry, etc. Well, if you believe that and you draw something from it, good for you. But I don't. I see it demonstrative as weakness, albeit, of course, your tears are my fuel. So you can carry on weeping if I've made you. Indeed, if somebody's crying about something and it irritates me and I deem it's not appropriate to be supportive, I will say to them, what on earth are you crying for? So then they get upset that because I've been nasty to them, and then they're crying because I've been nasty. Good. Now it's my fuel. Now we're talking. Now we're cooking on gas.
Double fuel. Yeah, makes sense. Okay, H.E., so what about, which actually what you just said about cognitive empathy, kind of faking it, right? I think that's actually probably what keeps empaths involved in relationships or interactions with narcissists for longer periods, because they assume that they think the same way as them, which is that emotional thinking kicking in, right? But there's also that cognitive dissonance, which I'd love for you to kind of give us a little bit of feedback on those two phenomenons and why, you know, people who are in relationships with narcissists tend to stay for prolonged periods of time, especially empaths. So.
Yeah, well, the empath has an addiction to the narcissist, and it's a symbiotic relationship that exists. Empaths are the easiest to ensnare and keep ensnared, and therefore those are the individuals that are going to provide us with the prime aims most effectively, and that's why we hunt them. Similarly, the empath is drawn to the narcissist because of the addiction, and the addiction's formed as a consequence of being an empath, and possibly also because of the imprinting of being involved with a narcissist at an early formative age. And I go into greater detail in that in the addiction, the foundation, which can be found in my knowledge vault. Links are usually beneath my YouTube videos or in the menu bar at narcsite.com. So the addiction is formed in the empath, and that addiction creates emotional thinking. Emotional thinking is the agent of the addiction. What it does is this is a triple threat. It causes that victim to use flawed logic. It causes their traits, both empathic and narcissistic, to be corrupted, and it causes them to feel a particular way, so they act upon those feelings. And so, for instance, it'll corrupt their truth seeker trait. So they think that it's logical to try and get answers from this individual, even though the individual isn't giving them any straight answers. And rather than think to themselves, well, I asked him why he behaved as he did, and his answers really don't stack up for me. That's problematic. I'm not going to keep asking. I'm just going to stay away from this person. Instead, the response is, but I need to know. I need to understand why he ended the relationship. And his answers don't quite make sense to me. So there must be more to it behind it. So I'm going to keep asking him. And of course, that's madness, because all you're doing is trying to make a narcissist be held to account, which of course threatens the narcissist's sense of control. And the narcissist will either feed you a load of baloney, feed you some half-truths, tell you some truths that perhaps you won't like, or will withdraw from you and not answer you whatsoever. And rather than you think, okay, so they don't want to talk to me, fair enough, there we are, I'm going to move on with my life, driven by the addiction and the emotional thinking, the victim thinks, but he owes me an answer. And I don't understand, because everything was hunky-dory to begin with. It was all unicorns and glitter and sweet-smelling roses, and then it all went horribly wrong. If it was like that at the beginning, we must be able to get back to that. And that's the flawed emotional thinking, because what they're failing to see is this, that if somebody has been systematically and repeatedly abusing you, there is no way they could have loved you, because somebody who loves genuinely through emotional empathy isn't abusive. And so, driven by this fog of emotional thinking, empathic victims get it the wrong way around. They think, it was wonderful once, something's got wrong, but we can fix that. So it's the desire to heal and fix that empathic trait which becomes corrupted. We can fix that and we can get back to it. What they fail to realize is that supposed love was never genuine. That supposed affection was never genuine. It was another form of manipulation, because we abuse you twice. We abuse you in the, if you like, standard way of punching you in the face, ignoring you, sleeping with other people, telling you that you are ugly, fat, and horrible to spend time with, or whatever it might be. And we abuse you by flattering you, giving you great sex, telling you that you're our soulmate, when actually none of it's genuine, and it changes on the flip of a dime. And the emotional thinking keeps the empathic victim locked into trying to interact in some shape or form with the narcissist. So for some people, it's about working out what went wrong, trying to understand. For others, it's trying to fix the problem and getting back together. For others, it's about bringing some kind of divine retribution on the backside of the narcissist and condemning them to oblivion. But either way, whatever those things are, you're remaining engaged in some way and you're feeding the addiction. And people think, well, it's right that I go round and tell his friends and family about what a low-down, utter scumbag he is. No, all you're doing is feeding your addiction, because you're talking about the narcissist and doing something in relation to the narcissist, and therefore you're being driven by that emotional thinking. Anything that compels you to continue to interact with the narcissist in any shape or form, or is causing you to think of doing that, is driven by emotional thinking.
That's interesting. And that's more in the context of romantic relationships. But what about like narcissists that you're involved with in a familial or a work environment?
In a familial environment, emotional thinking works like this. It corrupts your empathic trait of honesty. I feel guilty for cutting off my mother. After all, she is my mother. I can't not talk to her. She's my mother. No, she's not. She's just biologically your mother. She's not gained the title by behaving like a mother towards you, but your emotional thinking makes you feel guilty for cutting her out. Or it might get you to continue to seek approval from that parent, even as an adult. I was never praised as a child. I need that validation. I need to be told that I've done well. Why won't dad give me that love? Why won't mum give me that support? Or the truth seeking. Why did you ruin my childhood? Why do you always interfere in my relationships with other people? Why is it never good enough? And of course, all you're doing is challenging a narcissist, and they will reject that, driven by their own narcissism. In a work environment, it causes you to believe that perhaps you're doing something wrong and therefore you merit being treated this way, or that you recognize this behavior is wrong and that this person needs to be brought to account, that they need to be told and that they have to change. Or that perhaps you can impress them by working even harder and then proving yourself so that they will then acknowledge you and think that you're doing well. Or that you go and talk to this person and say, look, I don't really like the fact that you keep stealing my presentations and passing them off as your own. Can we sit down and talk about this? Surely you recognize that's not fair. You're not going to get very far at all with the narcissist, because they'll probably go, I don't pinch it. You're the one pinching my work. And then you think to yourself, what? That's utterly outrageous. And driven by your corrupted truth seeker trait, you spend your time trying to get somebody who's blind to see that they're wrong and you're right, but they can't. So stop trying. So emotional thinking, as you rightly point out, manifests not just in the romantic arena, it appears in a social arena. Why is this friend not talking to me? Why do they never invite me? I'll go around and chat with them and say, why are you being like this? Being like what? You always ignore me. No, I don't. You do. No, I don't. There might be, it's in your head, but such and such said, oh, well, such and such is just jealous of the friendship that you and I have got. Oh, are they? I didn't realize that. And immediately you're being triangulated.
Yeah.
And you fall for it because your emotional thinking doesn't want you to see what's really going on. It doesn't want you to see that you're being manipulated. It doesn't want you to understand that you're being abused by somebody who can do nothing but abuse you. It doesn't want you to accept that this person cannot change. So through lots of different ways, through that triple threat, it keeps you engaged.
Yeah, so it kind of wants you to see the good in the other person, regardless of what they're doing, because you're putting yourself in their shoes.
Well, empathic people invariably do see the good in people. Empathic people are individuals that generally trust to quite an extensive degree. Now, everybody has to trust to some extent. Even I have to trust. I have to trust the utilities company to ensure that electricity and water reaches one of my properties. I don't ring them up each morning and say to them, right, tell me how you're going to ensure that my electrical supply remains constant throughout the course of the day. I have to trust that they deliver it.
Right.
Of course, I have no trust of people in intimate relationships, but empathic people are very trusting.
Yes, more trusting.
And therefore, they understandably, but erroneously, when they're dealing with a narcissist, although they don't know that they are, believe that a person will operate with a similar level of trust. If I'm trustworthy, I expect everybody else to be. Somewhat naive, but it's an honest belief. And therefore, they think, well, if this person told me these things, that must be true. You don't automatically think when somebody goes, oh, Christine, I really like that blouse that you're wearing there. Is it salmon pink? It really suits you. You don't then go, why do you like this blouse? Give me 5 reasons why you like this blouse. Because then your friend will go, what's got into you? You will automatically accept that you accept the compliment. Some people are better at it. Some people blush and go, oh, don't. Other people, oh, thank you. That's really nice of you. I love what you're wearing too.
Yep. So that's
you don't immediately you don't immediately cross-examine that person as to the provenance behind them flattering you or paying you a compliment.
Right.
So empathic people, because you see the good in people and because you're trustworthy and because of those empathic traits being so strong, they're corrupted by emotional thinking to keep you in the game.
Yeah. And that explains cognitive dissonance to a certain degree as well, where your brain is searching for that positive interaction, right? Even though there's negative and positive, that intermittent reinforcement, your brain wants to focus on the positive and kind of trick you into believing that's going to come back again, right?
Indeed. Well, brains, Homo sapiens brains love certainty. They're designed for certainty.
Exactly.
And that's why our brains play tricks on us. So way back tens of thousands of years, our forebear who's out there on the grasslands, out of the corner of his eye, he sees a snake, so he runs away. And when he looks back from a safer distance, it's actually a stick. It was always a stick.
Yeah.
But why did he see a snake? Because his brain tricked him into seeing a snake. Because if he hesitated, he might have been bitten if it was a snake. So the easiest thing to do is make him automatically realize it's a snake, so he runs away. If you're being pursued by a lion, your vision automatically tunnels. It doesn't actually tunnel. It's caused by your perception because your brain does that to you. So you focus on your exit. So you're not distracted by the Louboutin shoes and you stop and then get eaten by the lion. You continue towards your exit. So your brain loves creating certainty and your brain cons you. You see, I think it's less than 10% of what actually comes through your eyes is used by your brain to create an image. The rest is from memory and an artificial construct to help you process what's going on in a meaningful fashion. That's why people talk about time apparently slowing down when a lot's going on, to enable your brain to process everything. It's a perception. So the brain loves certainty. So when it comes to dealing with us, you're dealing with somebody whose behaviors were going in the way that you expected them to do. They said they loved you and they smoothed your hair and rubbed your back and they gave you a kiss and they bought you flowers and they took you to nice places and they said how much they adored you. And then cue the record scratch. It goes wrong. No, this isn't right. This doesn't follow. It's meant to be a continuance now into a more deep-seated, familiar role. It's not meant to go into fighting and screaming and shouting and not turning up and then ignoring my text message. This doesn't make sense. This doesn't make sense. And so the brain goes, I don't like this. This isn't certain. So what it has to do is it tries to create a certainty by saying, well, maybe it's because of this, and maybe we can get back to that. And it ends up conning the victim because it tries to create a certainty that's actually not in your best interests.
Yeah, so true. I mean, the brain creates certainty, but it also creates safety, right? Which is even more important, I think, certainty. You know, my background is in internal medicine and I focus on gut health, and, you know, the gut and the brain are very closely connected. And the gut, believe it or not, sends signals to the brain through the vagus nerve. And, you know, that saying, go with your gut, or that gut feeling, that's actually a real phenomenon. It's your gut sensing something.
Okay.
And it's very strong in children and animals, much stronger than adults, human adults. And the reason is, you know, like you said, the brain over time wants to develop the certainty and the safety. And so what does it do? And what are we told in society? Don't judge a book by its cover. Don't judge that person, right? Whereas your gut is telling you, trust me, right?
Judge them.
So, you know, and cognitive dissonance is unfortunately, I think, what keeps a lot of people in these abusive relationships. So, thank you for that. Thank you for that clarification. I want to move on to fuel, which others call supply, but I actually like the term fuel better as well.
We'll have to edit that word out, I think.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. So speaking of fuel, narcissists need control, and they obtain it through the methods that you mentioned earlier, which are the prime aims. They obtain fuel through positive manners, but also through negative manners. And I actually read the book Fuel, which I recommend to everyone listening. I think it's very enlightening. I actually am reading Manipulated right now as well, and I just ordered Sitting Target.
Good.
So very enlightening books. You're very well-rounded, HG. Your YouTube videos, articles, books are very informative and really helpful to so many. And I'd love for you to kind of talk a little bit about positive and negative fuel and how a narcissist actually thrives on both types, and also maybe talk about when a narcissist does not get that fuel and they have a fuel crisis and how that looks.
Certainly. Well, thank you for the compliments about my work. That's appreciated. Fuel is our lifeblood. Fuel is the emotional response from others occasioned by our activities. So if I punch someone in the face and they go, ow, I've received some negative fuel. If I tell a girlfriend that her bottom looks big in that outfit and she cries, I've received some negative fuel. If I tell that girlfriend that she looks like a goddess in that dress and she's delighted and elated by smiling at me and thanking me, I've received some positive fuel. And fuel is delivered in lots of different ways. Making a cup of tea is a provision of fuel. The oohs and ahs of somebody's response while they're having sex with the narcissist provides fuel. The tears provide fuel. The shouting and the screaming provide fuel. Buying a birthday present provides fuel. Giving a promotion provides fuel. So fuel comes in lots of different ways, and it's divided into positive and negative. And as I alluded to earlier on, or rather mentioned, negative fuel is stronger than positive fuel. It's more potent to us. Fuel is provided by people, and we have different people in our fuel matrices. Tertiary sources, not particularly potent. Secondary sources, more potent. Intimate secondary sources, even more potent. And at the top of the tree, the intimate partner primary source and former intimate partner primary source, who have the most potent fuel. Fuel is delivered in different ways. Written word is the smallest amount, rather. Delivering it in person is the largest amount, and the variations in between, for instance, speaking on the telephone, Skype message, text message, and so on and so forth. And then there's the frequency of its provision. So we have the two different types of, we have three rather aspects to fuel, being amount, potency, and frequency. Now, the narcissist needs fuel in order to both fill up as much as can be possible the emptiness within and to power the construct. So the construct is what is shown to the outside world. And that construct is powered by the fuel. And so the different shards and fragments that are provided by character trait acquisition, they are in effect glued together by this fuel to create the construct. And so that construct is what charms people, is what is friendly and witty, or might put people down, or be particularly competent at certain things. And so the fuel is there to, first of all, fill up the chasm, to relieve the narcissist of that gnawing emptiness that exists, so that it becomes reduced from a sense of impending doom and a descent into oblivion to rowing back from that, moving backwards to a solid sense of unease, to moving back to something of an anxiety, to moving back to a slightly nagging itch, and then going in the other direction. As more fuel is received, the narcissist starts to feel more settled, more confident, starts to feel buoyant, starts to feel positively effervescent, fizzing with the power that is experienced as a consequence of the receipt of the fuel, and then becomes the sense of being invincible, being able to achieve anything, the swaggering Lothario that could pull any woman that comes his way, the research scientist that will discover the cure for the new disease in the next few hours. That pop star who will give the performance of his life, that sports star who will run and run and run, and that sense of being a colossus. So fuel is both there to make the chasm quieten down, to go away, and to power us, to continue to drive us forward as it holds the construct together. If a narcissist, for whatever reason, is denied fuel for a prolonged period of time and has perhaps been wounded, which is like a ship being holed beneath the water, the fuel leaks away and the fuel levels drop at a drastic rate. And that narcissist then starts plummeting towards a fuel crisis. And those sensations of unease become a greater sense of moroseness, that there's a sense of impending doom. They don't recognize, the unaware ones, that what's actually happening. They don't know that it's a fuel crisis. They just know that something doesn't feel right. They feel antsy. They feel a little bit sort of skittishness. And then there's an anxiety. And then it feels like the world's going to end. And they might even start to feel suicidal. And then, should they have the ultimate fuel crisis, it then starts to demonstrate in terms of self-neglect, withdrawal, essentially stopping functioning. Now, the narcissist doesn't die, but the construct does. The very thing that enables them to function through life crashes. The narcissist doesn't die, but it might push them to a point of the commission of suicide. That can happen. Or they basically almost become so that they can have psychotic episodes. They can almost start to enter a catatonic state. Until then, some more fuel comes along. And like the plant that has been starved of water, denied water, those first few droplets come and it starts to grow again. And once the fuel is revisited, that narcissist then starts to climb back up out of the chasm in which he found himself or herself. And that's essentially part of what goes on in the fuel crisis.
So you say a narcissist is not aware of what's going on. I mean, obviously they're feeling what they're feeling. So what do they, what do you think, like, what do you attribute it to? What do most narcissists think that is?
Well, some will think, for example, I'm depressed. Others will think, I've just got really bad anxiety. Some may think it's a bipolar episode. Some will just say, I don't know what it is. I just don't feel settled. Something doesn't feel right. Their paranoia will increase. They will think there's people talking about me. There's something going to happen. What are you talking? I don't know, but there's just something bad's going to happen. That sense of impending doom. An aware narcissist, of course, knows what a fuel crisis is, but invariably, the aware narcissist never gets anywhere near that, because the aware narcissist is far more accomplished at receiving fuel because they have much larger fuel matrices and more complicated ones. It's your lesser and mid-range narcissists are more likely to suffer that, particularly lessers, because what a lesser can do is alienate so many people, and then they lack the social mobility and cognitive function and perhaps financial freedom to move somewhere. And fuel crises are more apt to happen as well with older narcissists as they become more infirm. So they actually haven't got the mobility to go down a bar and pull some chick to get some fuel. They're housebound. And the children won't come and visit because dad's an irascible old character and basically has turned into a really nasty so-and-so. The wife left him years ago. Friends don't come round anymore because he always barks and is cruel to them. And even the hired help don't really like going.
Makes sense. So the greater kind of practices preventative medicine in a way where they prevent.
That's right. And that's right. And it amuses me because often it gets thrown at me, and I understand why. People will say, well, one day, HG, you'll find yourself all alone, when you're old and decrepit. People like me don't become decrepit. We have access to the best healthcare. We look after ourselves. Our charm remains undiminished. And whilst the looks may fade, and not always, one can become just as distinguished in old age as one was when a young buck. Intelligence remains undimmed. Financial firepower remains undimmed. Never underestimate the ability of people's greed, and they will still come to heel as a consequence of having some greenbacks thrown their way. So for the greater narcissist or the ultra, not only do we look after ourselves better and have access to longevity, and we understand all of that, we also have many more strings to our bow with regards to the method of controlling people beyond just being, for instance, good looking and able to shag everything that moves. We would still be able to charm and talk. We'll still be able to talk about things in an erudite way. And there are those that say, well, what if you lose your mind? Well, then I won't care, will I? So
interesting. Okay. I want to switch gears a little bit medically.
Yeah.
So there have been some MRI studies that have, research studies that have shown that a particular part of the brain called the lateral anterior insula, which is responsible for emotions, has less gray matter in people with narcissistic personality disorder than other individuals. And apparently, conversely, with empaths, there's actually increased neuronal activity in that area. But that connects with the prefrontal cortex, which is a part of the brain that is responsible for impulse control and for executive functioning. And actually, that's part of the brain that doesn't develop in children until even in the early 20s, which is why you can't really diagnose a child as a narcissist because of the fact that that area is still working on impulse control, but also executive functioning, emotions, all of these things. So, you know,
I agree.
Yeah, narcissists have lack of boundary recognition, and they also have a good degree of impulsivity. So this might actually explain things. Maybe briefly, can you tell us a little bit about that impulsivity and the lack of boundary recognition and how to recognize it?
Yes, well, what you've explained there does make sense in terms of the amount of grey matter that exists in the areas that it regulates and affects. So, as you know, I'm not of a scientific bent, but as a man of intelligence, what you've proposed there does make sense. And of course, the impact that it has vis-a-vis impulsivity and lack of boundary recognition is something that is seen in many narcissists. Dealing with boundary recognition, essentially, we don't really have any. Why? Well, if we recognize a boundary, that impacts upon our ability to assert control over people because it stops us doing things. And the word no is not something that's allowed in our lexicon. So the boundaries, of course, are such as walking into somebody's house uninvited, touching somebody without invitation, taking somebody's money, taking somebody's food, you know, stealing somebody's food from a fridge, taking their clothes and wearing them, taking somebody's car, overstaying your welcome, moving in rather quickly, keep spending time over at the other person's house so that you effectively live there, commandeering assets to use as our own, commandeering friends as if they are our own, turning up at events that we're not invited to. And of course, we have to be access all areas. Our sense of entitlement and absence of accountability segue to mean that we don't recognize boundaries, because if we were to, that would put a fetter upon us. And a fetter means we don't have control. So we have to have an absence of boundary recognition in order to allow us to assert control, which of course, as you know, is one of the prime aims. So the fact that our brains have developed in a way whereby it's less of the grey matter, as you mentioned, which then has an impact upon not having a recognition of boundaries, makes perfect sense, because we can't recognize boundaries and respect them to the extent that non-narcissists would do, because that would impinge upon our ability to acquire the prime aims. Similarly with impulsivity, and I see really in a way, although narcissists can be impulsive, I see this more as applicable to psychopathy, because with the psychopathy, it's one of the essence issues there is boredom. And impulsivity often links into that in terms of doing something to alleviate that boredom. And there's a lot, and I recognize that within my own psychopathy, as you know, I'm a hybrid of the two, in terms of what will happen if I do this. So you will get, for instance, perhaps a lower functioning psychopath who think, I wonder what will happen if I pick this dog up by its lead and hold it up. Oh, look. It's making funny sounds and its eyes are squirming in its head. Look at that. And of course, that psychopath has no emotional empathy. Now, a narcissist might do that, but they'd be less inclined to do so when they're on their own. Why? because they're not gaining control of a person or drawing fuel from a person. Okay. Right. So whereas the psychopath wants to alleviate that boredom, may not necessarily know that that's what they're trying to do, and they have the impulsive response. And of course, impulsivity and boundary recognition collide. For instance, impulsively stealing. You don't recognize the boundary that that's not your property, and you do it impulsively because you need that stimulation in that moment to do so. So yes, it makes sense that there's those differences. And I agree with your comment also that you made, Christine, about the diagnosis that's made. As in essence, people's brains are still not totally formed until in their early to mid-20s. And so that's why you'll get a young person who perhaps, age 20, and he blows his first paycheck on a tattoo. And the parent goes, what on earth have you done that for?
Right.
And that doesn't mean that that's a self-entitled narcissist. It might just be that that individual is making poor choices because that function of their brain hasn't sorted itself out yet. And so occasionally I get people who come to me and they say, I'm concerned about my 14-year-old daughter. I think she's a narcissist. And I say, well, she might be, because narcissism's formed by the age of 9, but we can't say determinatively until she's older, because she might just be a teenager. She's being a teenager rather than being a narcissist. Going back to that point, there's elements of the brain that are still forming with regard to impulsivity, with making the higher executive function, and so on and so forth. So I agree with you about the diagnosis point.
Yeah, and you mentioned psychopaths. So
yeah,
a lot of people are confused as to the terms. This is what I think. Please elaborate a little bit more if I'm wrong. So a psychopath is a narcissist, but the difference between a narcissist and a psychopath is usually the narcissist has some degree of fear or anxiety, and there is this want to have a facade, right, to look a certain way. Whereas what I understand as psychopath is they don't care what they look like to others. There is no facade. It doesn't really matter to them. Is that kind of accurate, or maybe elaborate a little bit on that as well?
Yeah, it's largely so. The narcissist has to have fuel. The psychopath doesn't. Mm-hmm. So the psychopath doesn't need the validation of other individuals. Both don't have emotional empathy. And I've mentioned elsewhere that I am working on a body of work which talks about pure narcissists, narcissistic psychopath, which I am, and pure psychopaths. You're right about the fear point. Narcissists will experience fear in the way that they process it. I don't experience fear because of my virtue of being a hybrid, and psychopaths don't experience that fear. Narcissists fight against the emptiness. They don't necessarily know that that's what they're doing, but they do because of their need for control and fuel. They fight against the emptiness that's within them. They try to fill it up. They almost are seeking to try and feel things that they can't actually. The psychopath embraces the emptiness. They just don't care. This is what I am. And the narcissist will often, again, unconsciously, try and hide the emptiness so it can't be seen. The psychopath lets it be seen. So there'll be instances where, with a narcissist, you might get a glimpse of the emptiness here and there. The psychopath, and many empathic people will talk about that they feel that emptiness. And I've had it said to me by certain individuals that it's almost as if I come gliding past them, they suddenly feel, in a way to describe it, a disturbance in the force, they suddenly feel this emptiness. And they say, I feel this strangeness around you. There's almost like this is like there's nothing there. And I go, how interesting. And of course, I know full well what they're talking about, but I'm never going to admit to them and go, oh, yes, that's the psychopathy here and the emptiness within me that I embrace. Now, I need fuel, but I don't need as much fuel as a pure narcissist does. And of course, the psychopath doesn't. I similarly get bored very quickly, and I have to alleviate that boredom in the way that sort of a psychopath does. So I similarly have that desire. I wonder what will happen. And that's part of where although it does provide me with fuel, I also just get off on the reaction of people because it entertains me. I need to be entertained. Now, I can sit and get on with the task quite readily. I don't have a butterfly mind. I'm entirely committed to doing something. But after a while, so for example, certain things will bore me. So in certain situations, if somebody's talking about something, I'm bored, I need to do something to alleviate the boredom. Now, because of my higher executive function, I'm not going to immediately punch them in the face and then start laughing, but a psychopath might do that because they simply don't care. Whereas I bridge those two worlds, and because I operate a facade, I think I'm going to alleviate the boredom. But what I might do, for instance, is say, let's why don't we go and do this instead? Oh, right, okay. And it breaks their flow of conversation. And I suggest we're going to do something. So it's rather rude because I've interrupted them, but it's not so rude as to cause them to suddenly want to run away from me, as it would be the case if I punched them in the face. So I am going to go into this in further detail in the series that I'm creating, but those are some of the similarities and differences that exist. Your narcissist experiences anxiety. They have that skittishness, and they experience that fear, and they fight, as I say, against the emptiness, trying to fill it. Whereas the psychopath just embraces it. Narcissists need people.
Yeah.
They need people around them for the purpose of drawing the fuel, and also those people have to be controlled. A psychopath just sees people as playthings, objects to be utilized, and can go for long periods with no involvement with them.
I think we're going to have to do another series, HG. There's so much to digest.
Certainly. Certainly.
You're saying your narcissism affects your psychopathy to a certain degree?
It does affect it.
Right? Or at least affect it, right? Like it's preventing your psychopathy from doing more dangerous things because you want to maintain that facade.
It's interesting. It's interesting actually, because the facade need of my narcissism does assist, but also there are instances, although I did have an argument with the relevant psychologist, an American psychologist I was having a discussion with, part of my private involvement with her. And she said, your narcissism will at times get in the way of your psychopathy because of my need for recognition, which logically I understand what she's driving at. But the fact is that I've honed both so that I see that they complement one another, so that my need for recognition still doesn't stop me achieving what I need to achieve. And you make the valid point there about the use of the facade means that, for example, that when I meet somebody, I don't immediately walk up to them and set their dog on fire. I might think about doing it because I would find that amusing and it would alleviate boredom. But because of the facade use and the need for the validation of that individual and the need for control, remember, that doing that isn't the appropriate thing to do. And because I do have a high threshold of control as well, by virtue of what I am, it fights at extremes. There are times where I'm there thinking I'd love nothing more than to drive a rusty meat hook through this person's malformed cranium, and I think about their eyes spilling from their face and so forth. But I recognize that that would not be the appropriate thing to do, not because I think that's not nice to do that to them, but simply I recognize that would result in difficulties with regard to my need to assert control more generally, i.e. all of a sudden Her Majesty's finest are chasing after me, and that will get in the way of all of the other things that I need to do. So a lower functioning psychopath may well just grab something and stick it in somebody's neck because they want to see what their face looks like when they're bleeding, and it alleviates boredom, and they're not able to control that impulse that they have. In the same way that they steal. That's why so many low-functioning psychopaths end up in prison, because they're stupid and they do stupid things and they get caught. Most criminals are stupid. The small number are not. Those are the ones that get other people to do their dirty work, and then they assure that nothing leads back to them, and that's why they maintain their freedom. But most criminals, and of course not all criminals are narcissist psychopaths, many normals are criminals, but generally they tend to be fairly stupid people who either have a low cognitive function or have an inability to control their impulses. Hence they do things which are antisocial, and they end up in the situation that they're in.
Very, very, very interesting. We've kind of run out of time, HG, but I think we do need to do another part 3 where...
Absolutely. Let me know when and we shall organize that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.